And now I will turn it over to Jan to start our next section.
Okay, so this is the last hour, and we have a special presentation by Scott Frazier, consultant to LTCC. He's going to give us his review of the WSAB DEIR. Kristen has also uploaded the report into the chat for people to view. So I believe Scott's here. Scott, would you like to start the presentation, followed by very short Q&A, because we do have a hard stop at 5 o'clock.
Absolutely. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. And I'm going to be sharing from my screen. This is the report that I believe Kristen just shared in the chat with you. But if you'd like to follow along with me, you can view your screen where you should be seeing this as well. My name is Scott Frazier. I am a consultant. I've been working with the task force from LTCC about the West Santa Ana Branch Transit Corridor project, which I'm sure you're all familiar with in broad strokes. This is a new planned light rail line that potentially would travel through the boundaries of the Little Tokyo community. It would be the third such of those projects from Metro within the last 2 decades. And of course, Little Tokyo has continued to become increasingly important from not just Metro's perspective, but also from the perspective of regional transit travelers. And so with LTCC, with this task force, I have been working on analyzing the draft environmental impact report from Metro. That is a 1,300-page document with an additional several thousand pages in appendices, all centering around the question of what are the potential benefits and what are the potential impacts that could affect communities along the route and could impact travelers throughout the region, depending on how this project is eventually built. So I'm going to walk you through some of my recommendations based on the analysis that I have done and based on the conversations that I've had with members of the LTCC task force previously to today. And that should take us up to about 4:30, and then I'll make sure that we have some time for question and answer. Also, if you have any questions that you think of during my presentation, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And like I said, we'll return to those at the end of the presentation. So first, a little bit of an introduction. As I mentioned, the West Santa Ana Branch Transit Corridor project is intended to be a new light rail line. Metro has several such lines. These are modern versions of streetcars that folks are probably familiar with, from the Expo line to the original Blue line, now called the A line, from downtown Los Angeles to Long Beach. This new line would stretch from downtown Los Angeles, potentially, to southeast Los Angeles. There are 4 under consideration alternatives for how the line could be built. Those alternatives do not extend to what technology is going to be in use anymore. There was some previous discussion about that, but at this point in time, they're only looking at different geographical routings. So in order, we have alternative 1, which looks at building a light rail line from Union Station in downtown Los Angeles to southeast Los Angeles in the city of Artesia, where each of these alternatives would end. The second one, instead of beginning at Union Station, would begin in the area of 7th Street and Metro Center in downtown Los Angeles's financial district. The third option would be shorter than the first 2, ending at the A line, the Blue line's Slauson Station in South Central Los Angeles. And alternative 4 would be ending at the 105 freeway at the location of a new transfer station with the existing C line, the green line, in the median of that freeway. As I mentioned above, the DEIR, as it's called by Metro, is a very complex document, is a technical document. it is intended to run the gamut of technical analysis required by state, federal, and local laws. So that's why it is so long. That is why it has so many detailed appendices, because Metro's staff has been at work on this for the past several years in order to check the boxes and make sure that they have exhausted all of the legally required analyses, in addition to preparing the alternatives that the board of directors will want the opportunity to select from when it comes to the next stage in this process, which is the selection of an alternative to begin construction. This project is funded primarily by Measure M, which was the 2016 sales tax. That sales tax in its expenditure plan set aside $4 billion over the course of the next 45 years for constructing the West Santa Ana Branch project. And some of that money comes up front. That's $1 billion in the first 15-year period and $3 billion in the next 15-year period. However, Metro has been really optimistic about the ability to fund this project more rapidly than was initially anticipated by voters. And they are hoping to have this project under construction by next year and opening in time for the 2028 Olympic Games in Los Angeles. So that's just a little bit of background for what we're going to be talking about today. Additionally, it's very important, I was speaking about Jan this morning, an important thing to note, and I'll just go down here before I go to our recommendations. An important thing to note about alternative 1, where's my note here? Oh, I apologize, I don't actually have this listed out here. And so if I go back up to the map here, you see that Union Station is a potential terminus here, as I was talking about. Alternative 1 would go to Union Station. Embedded in alternative 1 is 2 different design options. There's a so-called design option 1, which has to do with where the station location would be within the Union Station campus. There are 2 options there. With design option 1 selected, the platform at Union Station would be moved further to the east and would be located near the Metropolitan Water District building. Without option 1, the line would instead terminate near what Metro calls the Union Station forecourt. It would be underneath Alameda Street, so further to the west. Separately, there is a different question about design option 2. Design option 2 is whether or not to include a station within the Little Tokyo neighborhood boundaries. So those questions are separate and not in conflict with each other. They are just about how alternative 1 in particular would be designed. There are a couple of tweaks that the Metro Board of Directors has the ability to select from. And that will be important, you'll see once we get into our recommendations. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. So based on the review of the available materials that I conducted and our conversations with the task force as a whole, I've laid out several recommendations from myself as consultant to Little Tokyo. The importance of these recommendations is that this is actually the most important part of the development process when it comes to establishing what Metro will select for construction. After the draft environmental impact report is presented to the board of directors, which is going to happen in October, then the board of directors will select, we're hearing that this will happen in either December or January, the board of directors will select what is known as a locally preferred alternative. That takes into account all of the comments that they have received from neighborhood groups, from individuals, and from cities along the route. And they will use that in order to determine which of the available alternatives will actually be built. So this is a very critical moment when it comes to giving feedback and hopefully swaying the decisions that will be made by the Metro Board of Directors for this major construction project. Having said that, the first set of recommendations that I have are based on the alignment of the route, which alternative is selected, and the stations that are included in that route. The first recommendation I have is that LTCC should support the selection of alternative 1 as the locally preferred alternative. The alternative 1 proposal is the only one that would actually travel through the boundaries of Little Tokyo, and it would bring with it not only an increased connectivity for Little Tokyo to the regional rail network, but it would also result in Little Tokyo becoming this hub for regional travelers, increasing the ability of local businesses to draw from a growing well of potential patrons, making it so that Little Tokyo is actually probably the second or third most important hub station within the Metro rail network. Based on that, and also based on the fact that Metro's own Measure M proposal sought to connect this line to Union Station, and that has also been a source of some contention that a lot of the other, actually none of the other alternatives proposed to fulfill what was campaigned on here for the voting public. I think makes alternative 1 an attractive choice for Little Tokyo to support. The next 2 recommendations are based on the design options that I just laid out for you. They are design option 2, which is the inclusion of Little Tokyo Station, and design option 1, which would shift the Union Station platforms further to the east in the Union Station campus. And I want to talk about why my recommendation is to support both design options 1 and design option 2. Design option 1 does not fall within the boundaries of Little Tokyo as a neighborhood. So I understand it might be confusing why my recommendation is to take a stance on that. However, the implication of design option 1 is that because Little Tokyo and Union Station are so close together, the decision of where to put the station at Union Station changes how the underground tracks are going to be directed within the boundaries of Little Tokyo. So without the inclusion of design option 1, that is to say, with the line continuing in a straight line underneath Alameda Street, about 80 feet below Alameda Street, there would be a requirement from Metro to procure an easement of about 228 square feet that would be underneath the property of JANM. And so in my conversations with the task force, it was expressed to me that JANM has serious reservations about that easement. It is a small easement, but certainly with JANM being a significant historic and cultural monument in the boundaries of Little Tokyo, it is something that needs to be taken into consideration. So the way that I propose LTCC get around this is that that easement is only required in the event that Metro proceeds without design option 1. With the station at Union Station being located under Alameda, they say that they need this easement abutting and extending into the JANM property. If design option 1 is selected, then Metro would not need that easement because the tracks within Little Tokyo would veer to the east. So it does not actually intersect with JANM's property at that point. So that is why I recommend for design option 1 to be selected. Design option 2, the arguments in favor are very similar to the argument in my mind in favor of selecting alternative 1. Namely, if design option 2 is not selected, there would be no stop in Little Tokyo. the line would pass from Union Station to the Warehouse and Arts District Station at approximately 7th and Alameda without stopping in Little Tokyo. And I think that based on my review of Metro's analysis, there are clear benefits, not just for local stakeholders, but also for riders at large in the inclusion of a Little Tokyo station. There is going to be a very important station here along the regional connector already that is under construction and set to open next year. The connection between the regional connector and the new West Santa Ana branch line would be a benefit multiplier for riders of Metro's system, and also would create spillover positive effects for the Little Tokyo community at large in terms of increasing the amount of foot traffic and bringing more economic, again, positive impact into Little Tokyo as a neighborhood. Lastly, so just to state clearly what my recommendation is here, the LTCC should request Metro's Board of Directors designate alternative 1 with both design options 1 and 2 as the locally preferred alternative. I won't go over those in the interest of time. I won't go over those reasons. They are the same as laid out above. And then proceeding from there, the importance for Little Tokyo, I think, as a neighborhood is to lay out not merely what is supported, but also which actions would be opposed. So I did recommend outright opposing alternatives 2, 3, and 4 to be selected as the LPA, the locally preferred alternative, for the reason that alternative 1 is the one that provides the most direct benefit to Little Tokyo in the long term. I also recommend that LTCC support the proposed location of the Little Tokyo station. This is design option 2 proposes to put that station in between 1st and 2nd Street underneath Alameda. The entire alignment of this line within the boundaries of Little Tokyo is below grade. It will be a subway. And we want to make sure that this location is chosen or supported because it does not produce significant impacts either to existing residences in terms of forced displacements or acquisitions, and does not produce easements or other takings to commercial or cultural buildings. There are, I think, only length of construction impacts from the line anticipated within Metro's documents. And we'll get into the construction impacts a little bit further down. I do also recommend that LTCC support the inclusion of 2 portals, that is entry and exit from Little Tokyo Station at the proposed locations by Metro. Those are one on the east side, approximately at the location of the LADWP facility, to the north of Angel City Brewery, and the west side closer to the location of the regional connector station at or around 1st and Alameda. The reason for including 2 portals here is because this, as I mentioned at the top, will be one of the busiest stations in the whole of Metro's network. And looking at national and international examples, you would be, I think you would be hard pressed to find an example of a station that would be as busy as Little Tokyo Station would be under these proposals that would have just one entrance or exit. The redundancy is important. It allows people to self-sort to the destination they're trying to get to, eliminating unsafe or unpleasant crowding within the station itself. It also allows for, in the event that there are required maintenance activities going on at one end of the station, it allows for the continued utility of the station. Again, this is going to be a station that would be attracting upwards of 20,000 passengers per day under Metro's estimation. Lastly, LTCC should support what has been proposed by Metro. Those are safety and security mitigations for Little Tokyo Station. I have heard from members of the task force that this is, of course, a pressing concern for members of the Little Tokyo community, how to make sure that people using the station are safe, and also how to make sure that when the station is not in use, that it is not becoming a hangout for people who are potentially doing unsavory things within the boundaries of Little Tokyo. Metro has proposed to begin installing and also retrofitting on existing stations security grates for the entrances so that stations can be closed to the public when they are not in use. This is, of course, something that is also done internationally. If you look at the examples of London, Paris, Japan, that is very common. A system like New York's in the United States, which never closes, is on the world stage considered to be an outlier. And most of the global rail systems do have the ability to close off entrances when they are not in use. So my recommendation here is to follow that global model. We do not have a 24-hour system here. It makes sense to close station entrances when not in use. And also to provide for closed circuit television at entrances as well as on platforms, and to make sure that walkways and all other aspects of Metro's property within Little Tokyo are well lit. So next, I want to move into two things that I consider to be deficiencies in the existing draft environmental impact report. And by deficiency, I mean simply that they are things that Metro apparently did not consider as a matter of this public analysis. The first is that LTCC should request Metro identify the Little Tokyo community as an environmental justice community, and to identify the First Street corridor as a historic cultural resource. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Metro is required to do specific types of analysis based on state and national legal frameworks. That being said, there's nothing preventing them from going further in their analysis. And I think that what we want to see, or what I would recommend to ask for from them, is that Little Tokyo explicitly be called out as an EJ, environmental justice community, due to the heavy concentration, of course, of people of color households, low income households, advanced age households, and the presence as well of elevated levels of particulate matter in the air. And for the historic cultural status, this is something where in the past, Metro, I believe, has looked at the historic First Street corridor as having impacts that are potentially more sensitive to construction, and that was not included this time around. So it's just a recommendation that Metro revisit their analysis in view of the resources that exist in Little Tokyo and the composition of this community, to ensure that that the sensitive continuity that exists here is taken into account. The last deficiency that I'll go over is related to the transfer between the regional connector station and the planned station for the West Santa Ana branch line. Now, this actually seems to me to be a very significant oversight, again, within Metro's analysis, which is that they plan for users of the West Santa Ana branch station not to be able to directly access the regional connector station via an underground tunnel. Rather, passengers would have to climb three levels from the subway platform to the street level, and then walk at street level to the regional connector station, and then go back down 2 levels to get to the platforms of the regional connector. That's a significant impairment of the quality of the Little Tokyo station, would limit the utility for riders, and also would diminish the ridership almost certainly, because that is a very poor transfer quality. And from a transit perspective, we know that transfers are one of the most fraught aspects of transit planning. They can really pose a barrier. I mean, if you're thinking about being somebody who uses a mobility aid, a walker or wheelchair, that adds several minutes to your time at a minimum. And that is not really fair to the riders. So the proposal here is that Metro's board of directors actually instruct the Metro staff to find a way to connect to these two stations via underground walkway. Let's get into construction mitigation. My first recommendation for this, for the construction of the line, is that LTCC request Metro extend its radius of who is getting notified about construction activities. The minimum, I believe, that Metro is required either by policy or by state law is that they provide a notification of 1/4 mile within the work site in Little Tokyo. Given the fact that Little Tokyo is, of course, an urban neighborhood in the middle of downtown Los Angeles, and it is surrounded by the freeway ring, which generates a lot of car traffic, I think it's insufficient to provide a 1/4 mile radius of notification. My recommendation is that that be expanded to 0.5 miles so that it would capture a significantly larger subset of businesses and residences within the downtown Los Angeles area. The spillover effects from construction, as you're all aware, are pretty severe in downtown Los Angeles. So providing more residents and business owners notification will hopefully help help those businesses and residents plan their activities during the time that construction is ongoing. The next recommendation is that Metro continue to provide detailed detour information to anybody walking or getting around through other mobility means through Little Tokyo. Detour information should be updated, it should be accurate, it should be available online. And in my next recommendation, I also say that those detour routes should be provided in person as well. This has frequently been a problem in the past in terms of the detour information not being kept up to date, signs being hit by drivers and not being replaced in a prompt manner. So we want to make sure that Metro has a plan for ensuring that that will be the case throughout the construction period in Little Tokyo. The next recommendation is for Metro to minimize disruptions to transit and not to support any full shutdown of the regional connector during construction. As you're probably aware, the Gold Line has been shut down for over a year at this point due to construction along the regional connector. Little Tokyo has a high population relative to the average in the county of people who are dependent on transit. These types of disruptions are really severe, and they're felt very acutely by the folks who need transit to get around. So my recommendation is that Metro not approve shutdowns like this in the future and not shut down the regional connector station in Little Tokyo when construction begins on the West Santa Ana branch. The next recommendation is for Metro to provide public information and data regarding the monitoring of sound and air quality from construction activities. Based on my conversation with Little Tokyo stakeholders and folks on the task force, I've heard that there has been an ongoing concern about the sound from construction sites along the regional connector. And I think that Metro has done perhaps the minimum that they could do in terms of providing information to residents living through a construction period, especially as Little Tokyo has been such an essential partner for Metro in the construction of the rail network. I think that there is more that Metro can do to be a good partner to Little Tokyo. And one of the things that I would suggest is that that includes providing publicly available information, updating it regularly about sound, the sound that is being monitored from the construction site. There are mitigations proposed in this document, particularly the sound wall, which is actually something that is already in place for the regional connector site as well. But I think that we want to make sure that Metro is actively monitoring sound, monitoring the dust emanating from the construction sites at different locations around the neighborhood, and that individuals can, without too much effort, actually look online and see what the current status is in Little Tokyo based on the monitoring of construction activities. And lastly, there are proposed new mitigations. First, I recommend that Little Tokyo Community Council should request Metro continue the business interruption fund to support small businesses and to expand the footprint of who is eligible for a business interruption fund grant from the businesses that are directly abutting the work site to a larger radius. Currently, these grants are available to what Metro calls small mom and pop businesses. Those are based on the number of employees that the business has. I think what we really want to see here, my recommendation is that we want to see an increased eligibility for this. This has been nearly actually a 20-year, in truth, construction project in Little Tokyo. And I think that there are well-earned concerns about the continuity of businesses and the ability to maintain the commercial integrity of the Little Tokyo community so that folks who have borne this burden can enjoy the benefits of it once the construction is finally complete. So I think that it's certainly in Metro's interest and their responsibility to help Little Tokyo achieve that through the expansion of the Business Interruption Fund. Little Tokyo Community Council should request Metro reestablish a marketing campaign, Go Little Tokyo, which I was informed by the task force was funded independently by Little Tokyo stakeholders. Again, this is something where Metro should have a vested interest in helping Little Tokyo inform members of the public that Little Tokyo businesses are open and accessible throughout the construction at West Santa Ana branch. And we want to make sure, again, this is where it's important to make sure that transit options remain open. We expect that there will be road closures during construction. Metro has typically moved those to off-peak times, overnight and weekends. But that said, we want to make sure that we are maximizing the accessibility of businesses and residences during the construction period. And lastly, my recommendation to Little Tokyo stakeholders is to recommend Metro create a fund to help stabilize residential and commercial tenants to help prevent the forced displacement of residents and businesses within the Little Tokyo district. The analysis provided by Metro assumes and provides statistical backing for the notion that this line will increase land values in Little Tokyo, and so there will be some benefits to homeowners and to commercial lot owners within Little Tokyo. One thing, though, that Metro does not do is assess how that might impact tenants, particularly those who are already dealing with the burden of high rents, whether they are commercial or residential. So the recommendation here is for Metro to actually design and implement a fund similar to the Business Interruption Fund that would help stabilize tenants in place and help them remain in the neighborhood to enjoy the benefits of this new line. And so with that, I know it's about a half an hour presentation. With that, I would like to turn over to Jan. Do you want to moderate our question and answer, and I can answer whoever has questions for me.
I can
Thank you very much,
for it.
Scott. That really was very detailed, but yes, because I'm on the phone, I'll
sorry.
ask Kristen
Yes, I
to do
apologize.
that, as well as, yeah, if there are any questions in the chat, she can also boot them up and have you answer them, with the allotted time. I mean, we can go a few minutes over 5, but really need to hard stop this by 5:10, because as you all know, there are other meetings that we have to get to. Thanks, Kristen.
No, thank you so much, Anne. Thank you, Scott, for that detailed and comprehensive overview of all the work you've been doing. We appreciate all your time. With the remaining 20, maybe a little extra minutes we have, we can just go right into question and answer. That was the main purpose for today. I know Grant had a hand, and then Mark, I saw that you unmuted yourself, so we can queue you up to be second. And then if folks just want to put up their hands up, we'll go in order, and also, of course, feel free to use the chat. So first I will hand over to Grant.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kristen. And yeah, thanks, Scott, for the report. I found it to be pretty detailed and felt like very well researched and analyzed. So really appreciate that. I actually have 3 questions. So, first question is, I agree and, appreciate your suggestion for the additional mitigation for businesses that are affected. And I'm just wondering, is there a case that we can make in our response to the EIR that will tee up that mitigation for Metro, basically to, call that out and, make sure that Metro can provide that as a mitigation? And then the second question is about displacement. Curious about, whether or not we can contemplate. I know that direct displacement is something that is contemplated in the EIR, but also have concerns about like secondary displacement, which can become as a result of real estate speculation and increased property values. And I appreciate that you started to mention that towards the end of your presentation. And then third, I'd like to dig in a little bit more around your conclusion in terms of the alignment that you're recommending. And I'm just curious, is that based more on data that was in the EIR and maybe a lack of environmental impacts, or is it more relative to like what you see as the perceived benefit to the neighborhood in terms of business and foot traffic and visitors to the community?
Thank you, Grant. I'll start. I'll take these in order. So in terms of the case that can be made in the response letter about mitigation for business, this is something that Metro's board of directors has historically been open to experimenting with. And the original business interruption fund program actually originated out of concerns from this community, from Little Tokyo. And so that wasn't, it's, I think, really important to consider when we're crafting a response or comment letter to, and this is true for LTCC as a group and also true for individuals. If anybody wants to make individual comment letters to Metro, it's important to consider what Metro is and is not doing. So in this entire enormous document, their main purpose is making sure that they can proceed with construction on a project that will meet federal and state requirements. That means that we should be looking at this as the lowest bar of the type of analysis that they could do and the lowest bar of the types of mitigation that they could introduce to help out communities. They're trying to make sure we've ticked boxes of reviewing different types of environmental questions as required by law, but they are not necessarily going to have their staff go through and create these mitigation programs and might need to be pushed in that direction. So I think that historically the board of directors has looked at this as, again, this is like the least we could do. And they have looked at ways that they can go above and beyond, particularly when they have informed comments from local groups of stakeholders. Little Tokyo is a really good example of that. So I think that there is a way to make that case. My recommendation would be that the expansion of the business interruption fund, when we look at Little Tokyo, a neighborhood that is dense and has a mixture of residential and commercial uses and is also thoroughly integrated into the greater downtown LA fabric, there is, I think, a pretty clear case to be made that when it comes to business interruption and when it comes to the ongoing business interruption that has been experienced within this community over the course of a decade plus, that there is a need to reach out in a more substantial way to businesses surrounding the West Santa Ana branch line, and that the impacts are being felt not just by those businesses that are immediately next to the construction site, but also by businesses that are scattered throughout Little Tokyo and that are potentially feeling a need to either increase their marketing or try and get their existing customer base in new ways to come into the store because it's more difficult to access than it had been in the past. Those are arguments that I think can be made to Metro's board of directors, and that I think they will be open to considering when it comes to mediating the impacts and expanding the program. Second, about displacement. So direct displacement is even as you're talking about, Grant, like the way that Metro considers direct displacement is very, very literal. It's like if the line directly means that we have to take your business and bulldoze it, or take your residence and bulldoze it, they consider that direct displacement. They don't consider anything beyond that. And I absolutely agree with you. I think that the secondary displacement impacts of rising rents and you mentioned land speculation are probably going to be far more pronounced. So Metro looked at their proposal and they found no direct displacement of residents under this proposal for alignment 1 and one temporary location. I don't think that they identify a specific business, but I think it's actually the DWP location, one temporary relocation for DWP workers where that portal would be. Having said that, I think that when we talk about secondary displacement, this idea that while there are going to be increased economic benefits for the neighborhood as a whole, not everyone who is currently in the neighborhood will be able to take advantage of them due to rising cost pressures. That is something where it's kind of a new frontier for Metro. And again, I think that this is the right group, and I think that this is the right community to raise those issues with Metro. And I'll say again, I think part of the case there is that Little Tokyo has been an essential partner to Metro over the course of the entire 21st century to date. With the construction of the Gold Line, the regional connector, and now the West Santa Ana branch, there has been construction and planning for this expansion of the regional rail network for a very long time here. Little Tokyo, in my estimation, has been a very good partner to Metro, and it's kind of a question of how can Metro give back to the Little Tokyo community to ensure that the benefits of this rail development are actually well distributed among the people who are living and working and have other community ties to the Little Tokyo neighborhood. So my recommendation is that we push Metro to come up with a program to stabilize existing residents and stakeholders in Little Tokyo. I didn't go into the detail of actually recommending a design for that program because I think that's a bit out of the scope of this particular document. But I think that my recommendation would be, that's a conversation that I think the sooner it's raised with the County Board of Supervisors Chair Hilda Solis, who is also the representative for the Little Tokyo area within the community, is probably a good thing. I know that she has been amenable to those types of programs in other areas in the county, and I think that the Metro Board of Directors would be interested in blazing that trail, for to use that phrase. Lastly, as far as the alignment goes, in terms of the choice of alignment, or my recommendation to support alignment 1, which would go through Little Tokyo, my assessment of Metro's analysis, which is of course, subjective, and everybody's calculation, I think, is going to vary somewhat. My assessment of Metro's analysis was the impacts of construction are, I think, able to be mitigated. And I think the long-term impacts, especially when we're talking about for construction within Little Tokyo, a period of 2 to 4 years, which is not negligible. But I think that the long-term benefits to Little Tokyo as a community, we're talking about creating in Little Tokyo as a community, I think in the long run, probably the second busiest station within the Metro rail network. And I think the ability to access Little Tokyo from anywhere in the county is a significant benefit and will be for a long time to the folks who live here, and also improves the ability of people who live here to get to other places. I think that those are benefits that I looked at as outweighing the short-term impacts, which I do see as primarily being the negative impacts as being primarily short-term based on what Metro has in this document. And I also think that it's kind of a matter of making sure that the pressure is on Metro to find ways to better mitigate the short-term negative impacts. I think in the past, they have not always done that. And I think that we're at a point in 2021 where Metro is no longer new to the rail construction game. They should be able to come up with new policies and new ways to approach construction that make this a less painful experience for people living through the construction. I hope that answered your questions.
Thank you. We'll go on to other questions or comments from folks.
Yes, I think Mark, go ahead, Mark.
Yes, you mentioned some 20,000 passengers going through each day. How many of those coming from the West Santa Ana line would go directly to Union Station? How many would go to the regional connector? How many would just come out on the street, get picked up by Uber and Lyft and taxis and other MTD buses?
Yeah, it's especially as it relates to the last part of your question, it's hard to know at this point, but it is a good question. Metro does assess who they think is going to be transferring directly. I mean, and by that I mean who is going to be transferring from the regional connector station to the Little Tokyo station. In this case, when somebody is passing through the Little Tokyo neighborhood, assuming that both of these stations are eventually built and operational, they do assume that about 60% of the passengers would be transferring. It's important to note, though, that we're talking about two rail lines that are very frequent, that the West Santa Ana branch would be operating every 5 minutes during rush hour, and the Little Tokyo, the Little Tokyo Regional Connector station would have trains passing through it every 2.5 minutes. So the important thing to note here is that while Metro is saying 60% of these people are transferring from one line to another, what that doesn't comprehend in their analysis is when somebody is taking the train or commuting via train from work, they might be able to say, oh, hey, I'm meeting somebody who, I'm meeting somebody who is coming from the arts district and I work in the financial district. So I normally transfer at Little Tokyo Station, and that's how I'm represented in Metro's data, but maybe we want to get off and get a drink in Little Tokyo. It makes Little Tokyo a sort of logical meeting point. And this is sort of one of the impacts that as a transit professional, I would expect to see. It improves the ability for people to say, hey, what are you doing after work? Or, hey, it's the weekend, I want to go shopping. Why don't we meet in Little Tokyo? Because it's where our two train lines cross. So I think that figure doesn't necessarily account for something that I would call the ease of access to the neighborhood and the ability for people with a minimal amount of planning to be able to say, Little Tokyo is the place that I want to meet up, where I want to see friends or go shopping, because it is on the way to so many things by virtue of this plan. What I'll say too about like the prevalence of Uber and Lyft, et cetera, that is very hard to capture, and Metro hasn't even attempted to do so in this data. But certainly it's a consideration. One thing I will say is that it's not necessarily evident to me that somebody would take the train to Little Tokyo specifically in order to take Uber or Lyft, just because it is so centrally located. It seems like that that I can't deny that that is a possibility, but it doesn't seem like that would be happening in large numbers relative to other more outlying stations.
Great.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Scott. Thank you, Mark. We have maybe like 10 minutes left. Are there any other questions, thoughts?
Yeah,
You-
well,
yes.
I have a question. Wouldn't the route to Union Station be significantly considered if there was a future extension of it to the Burbank Glendale area?
That is part of, well, it is at least part of a long-term plan from Metro. There hasn't been any funding or planning documents identified for that route at this point, but certainly is something that Eco Rapid Transit, which is a group of cities north and south of the city of Los Angeles, including Burbank and the Burbank Airport Consortium. They have looked at how to extend this line, and yes, so from Union Station, there are actually multiple direct potential routes to the Burbank International Airport. That is something that I think does bear consideration in terms of making the recommendation for this route. Certainly,
Okay.
it's not impossible from. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
The other question I have is, it really bothers me that this Route 1 goes over rather than under the 10 freeway. I just can't visualize it going way the hell up over. Is it impossible to go under?
No, it's not. It's not impossible to go under. I think Metro made that decision based on my reading for purposes of cost. It is, I will say this, it's similar to what happens on the Expo line where it travels above grade, actually underneath the 405 freeway as it moves into the west side near Sawtelle. And there it is, I think, managed well enough that it's not particularly obtrusive. That being said, it is possible to go underneath the freeway, underground beneath the freeway. And they actually do that beneath the 101 freeway is the plan for the West Santa Ana branch.
I see Chris Comay has a hand.
Hi, I'm, you touched on this a little bit, but I think the initial gut reaction to the idea of the West Santa Ana branch coming near or through Little Tokyo really had to do with the construction itself. Now, it sounded like what you were saying is that most of this will be a subway line, so it'll be mostly underground. But I do know that a lot of the residents and the businesses here have construction fatigue. As you said, this project's been going on, since they proposed it. Like, the regional connector's been going on for 13 years, and it's still not done. And so I just wanted to maybe ask a little bit more detailed that how you felt the construction of the West Santa Ana branch, if they take up the recommendations for alternative one and and the design and all that stuff, what that effect might be and what the residents and the businesses would have to endure in that period, which you said could be 2 to 4 years. And let me tell you something, if you say 2 to 4, I'd say like 7 to 9. But anyway, I was just curious what you, a little bit more detail, what you thought that construction period might be like.
Certainly, I appreciate that context, and I agree. Metro's track record on delivering projects on time is spotty at best. I think we've seen construction timelines throughout the county extend. The regional connector is, of course, one such example, but we've seen that happen for other projects as well. The Crenshaw line in the Crenshaw neighborhood is experiencing that currently. So Metro's plan, as it is laid out in this document, is that they would do a 2 to 4 year construction for the segment of the line that passes through Little Tokyo. The plan is to have a tunnel, or they use tunnel boring machines to construct the actual tunnels themselves, and then they do what's called cut and cover for the proposed station. These are possibly familiar terms from the regional connector. It would be a very similar construction process as proposed in this document. What I will say though is that, and Metro's representatives at the previous LTCC task force meeting that I was present at also highlighted this fact. At the current level of design, they don't have a finalized construction plan. That typically, they said, would come later on. They mentioned this in the DEIR as well, once they've selected a contractor. However, I think based on the previous experience and what they have in the DEIR, we can assume that what would be included would be nighttime and weekend closures. In order to construct the station itself, what they end up doing is digging a big pit, and then they do decking so that cars can continue to drive over the street while they are building the station itself. So in terms of the impacts directly felt by folks who are trying to navigate the neighborhood or to drive to locations within Little Tokyo, the biggest impacts would come from the road closures, and those would be part of the road at a given time, so it wouldn't be both directions. It would be part of the road at a given time, and it would likely be overnight or on weekends, which is also something that we've seen them do for the Purple Line in Mid-Wilshire. This is not to say that it would be no impact or that the impact would be insubstantial. However, Metro has specific mitigations for that they are used to using. What I would say is that where there are particular impacts of construction that Little Tokyo has gotten familiar with over the course of the construction of the regional connector, or even going back to the Gold Line, I would absolutely recommend that Little Tokyo be vocal about the aspects of construction that have been most difficult to endure. And I know that the dust in the air has been a big one, and that the sound from the construction sites has also been one that has caused some discomfort for existing residents. And what I would say is, based on the analysis provided, Metro is proposing to do very similar things to what they've done in the past. Granted that that's not a finalized plan at this point, but without the feedback that Little Tokyo wants more extensive mitigations, that would be my expectation based on my read.
Okay, thanks. I also appreciate you recommending that we remind Metro that we are an environmental justice district. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then I know we're a little bit over, but Clement had a comment in the chat and has his hand raised. So we'll have Clement close this out. And then if anyone else still has questions, just put it in the chat and we'll find a way to make sure you get your answers.
Well, thanks, Kristen. I just feel like, when they first started the regional connector, they brought one of those monitoring machines into the museum to monitor the vibrations. But it was only there for like 3 months before they pulled it out. And since then, there's been so many concerns about shifting concrete on the sidewalks, artifacts moving inside the building. There's just, the impact is terrible, and I can't imagine an easement. I feel like, though, that your comment about how Little Tokyo has been a good partner is something that I think Metro's taken advantage of us, in the sense that I feel like there were many paths to Union Station. They just chose Alameda because it was next to the good neighbors who tolerate this for, it's going to be, I'm going to die before this is done. And it's just like, it's just ridiculous. It's been such an inconvenience, you know, that they didn't use the right of way along Santa Fe or the existing rails, working with the Santa Fe rail or something. But I do feel like we should be asking for more than just mitigation. We should be either asking for control of the metro, the site that they're currently building, or something in mangrove, or something that the community can have that can help us mitigate the gentrification that's going to occur as a result of this. So yeah, I would say they should be nice to the good neighbors and give us much more than a couple of $100,000 a year.
I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that first of all, there are actually, at least in favor of the alignment that is proposed here, there are some good reasons why they didn't go through Santa Fe in terms of the constraints of the existing rail uses there. But I definitely see your point, and I think that it's absolutely fair to say that Metro is walking a fine line between making use of Little Tokyo and overusing Little Tokyo. What I think though is that the first thing that you said is probably the most concerning to me. Like when we talk about measuring for vibration for 3 months and then just being like, okay, everything is fine, we're pulling that equipment out. There's not really a clear reason to me why that should be done. I think that those kind of that kind of monitoring equipment, in the grand scheme of things, I just want to remind everyone we're talking about a what they propose as an $8 to $9 billion rail project. In the grand scheme of things, the monitoring equipment is extremely cheap, as is the actual ongoing monitoring. Those are two costs that I think that Metro can absolutely bear. And I don't see a clear reason why you would say, okay, we're going to put this in for a couple months, we're checking that box off, and then we're pulling everything out. I think that monitoring should be done on an ongoing basis. And I think that is one such way that Metro can say to Little Tokyo, we stand by the mitigations that we are proposing for construction. And I think that that's a very reasonable ask. I think I absolutely take your comments, Clement, around the ongoing nuisance caused by the construction in general. I think it makes a very strong and compelling case.
Great, thank you so much, everyone. It's 5:06. We should probably close out so task force members have a little bit of break before their next meeting. But I just want to say thank you so much, Scott, for your time and all your work on this. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Thank you, everyone.
Had a question, thank you. If you had a question and you didn't get to it, just email me or contact us in some way. We also have a meeting this Saturday morning, 10 a.m. also on Zoom. The information for how to access that meeting, I just put in the chat. You also will probably see another email from me reminding you about it. So that will be more time for a deeper discussion and just talking about how do we feel about this and making sure everyone's concerns, questions, and other thoughts are answered. So with that, any other last, oh yeah, go ahead, Jan. I was just gonna say, Jan, do you want to close this out?
So, yep, so yes, please put your questions or comments in the chat. Kristen will be able to get it to us. And there is a special WSAB meeting this Saturday from 10 to noon with Scott returning, giving an encore presentation and allowing more time for community Q&A. So be aware of that. Kristen will resend the invite. But if there isn't anything else, then yes, we will close out. Thank you, Scott. It was just wonderful, as always. Your detailed analysis is really very helpful to everyone. Thank you to all the questioners. Thank you to all the presenters. And of course, thank you, Kristen and Ellen, both to record the draft minutes and also to host the meeting. Appreciate everything.
Thanks all.
All right,
Bye.
so that's it.
Bye.